Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench. Hello there, sorry to interrupt. I wanted to let you know that you can now join our supporting cast over on Patreon. As thanks for your support, you'll be able to help us pick films, submit questions for guests, have first pick on brand new and exclusive merch, and much more. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
Hello, welcome back to Fighting on Film. To coincide with the 80th anniversary of Operation Chastise in 1943, this week we tackle a huge film from that golden age of British war movies. It's 1955, The Dam Busters. And to join us, we've assembled our own special squadron of two to talk us through this monumental film. It's none other than Murray and James Holland. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting us on.
Thanks for having us, Skipper. I'm trying to get the lingo.
Connor,
Right,
60 a day.
Pull me out of the chair if my microphone goes off. Yeah. No, it's fabulous. It's absolutely fabulous to have you with us for what is probably one of the most well remembered and beloved films from that era. I think it's probably up there with The Cruel Sea in terms of rewatchability. Masters of Crafts working. So maybe just talking about Masters of Crafts there, we should just quickly go through the production, and I'm on it this week. And chaps, feel free to interject whenever you wish. So the film's directed by Michael Anderson, and he served in the Royal Signals Corps during the Second World War. He met Peter Ustinov during that time, and he cut his teeth as an assistant director. With him, he worked on the 1946 film School for Secrets, which deals with the SOE. And after directing The Dam Busters in 1955, he then directed the 1950s version of 1984. In 1956, he directed Around the World in 80 Days, which he got a Best Director nomination for at the 1957 Oscars. Then in 1957, he directed the Yangtze Incident that also starred Richard Todd, and his other credits include Operation Crossbow in 1965 and Logan's Run. And I think he was the oldest director to ever be nominated for an Oscar as well in his lifetime. The screenplay was written by the legendary R.C. Sheriff of Journey's End fame. He got a BAFTA nomination for his Dam Busters script, and I think if he hadn't have written it, I don't think it would be nearly as good because it's something very theatrical about a lot of the movie. We might come on to that later, but it's a fantastic script obviously based on Paul Brickhill's The Dam Busters and Guy Gibson's own Enemy Coast Ahead. It's produced by the Associated British Picture Corporation, released on May the 16th, 1955. Cinematography was by German-born Erwin Hillier, who's a frequent collaborator with Powell and Pressburger in the 40s. But then he refused to work alongside Jack Cardiff on A Matter of Life and Death, and he left the Powell and Pressburger. So he went to sort of do other projects. Yeah.
What was all that about?
Well, he didn't want to share credits with Jack Cardiff. He thought he was good enough, and it was a mixture of film, black and white film and colour film. And I think Powell and Pressburger wanted bit of sharing because he'd only worked on black and white film. It's a big thing. But then the special effects cinematography for The Dam Busters was done by Gilbert Taylor, who went on to be the cinematographer on Star Wars in 1977, and he definitely stole some shots.
Amazing. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Given that the Raid is like Lucas's inspiration, or one of them, for the Death Star run, that's wild.
That is 100%. Wild, yeah.
But he also was a cinematographer on Ice Cold and Alex as well. And obviously you have the Dam Busters March. Yeah, I know. It's crazy. All these connections that we find when we start the show.
I mean, that Eric Coates March must be the most replayed film, certainly British film, score ever, isn't it? By a mile.
Got to be like top 3 most recognisable, easily.
By a long chalk. And it's only filmed twice.
Cinema. And Brickhill was a great escaper as well. He worked, that's the other thing.
Of course he was.
It's incredible.
It really, really is. And it's all these people coming together who've had these experiences to make these movies, and it enriches them so much. In terms of filming, began in 1954, shot on location at RAF Scampton and RAF Hemswell, and it was used for ground shots as well. Upper Derwent Valley in Derbyshire doubled for the River Valley. Serving RAF Avro Lancaster crews operated the Lancasters. It utilised 5 bombers that were taken out of stores, and 4 were specially modified for shooting, 3 of which had appeared in Appointment in London 2 years previously. The bomb itself was still part of the Secrets Act, and it was animated over in stock footage. And the running cost for the bombers was, I mean, it doesn't sound like much now, but in 1955, it was quite a lot of money. It was £130 per hour to keep the Lancs in the sky, and it was 10% of the film's overall budget. So it wasn't, not a cheap thing to do, even in 1955.
No, wow, that's amazing.
You get the money's worth.
How much a war must have cost, doesn't it?
Well, exactly. Yeah.
Bloody hell.
And it obviously became it was critically successful. It became the most successful British movie at the box office in 1955. I couldn't find a budget, but I assume it's made its money back. It was nominated for an Oscar for Best Special Effects at the 1956 Oscars, and it lost the Battle of Toko-Ri, so at least it lost another aviation film. And it was nominated for 3 BAFTAs, including Best Picture. So that's a brief rundown of the production there. And I have a retro review before we go any further. It comes from Variety magazine from 1955, and it's a very brief little segment. For more than 90 minutes, the film is devoted to the planning and preparation, and a very absorbing material this proves to be. The reconstruction of the raid and the pounding of the dams is done with graphic realism. The aerial photography is one of the major technical credits. The production is a personal triumph for Anderson, Redgrave particularly, who gives a very human portrayal of Dr. Barnes Wallace, the scientist, while Richard Todd makes a distinguished showing as Guy Gibson, the RAF commander, a triumph.
Wow.
Pretty good. Can't really argue with that.
Can't really argue with that.
Could probably end the show there, really, couldn't we?
Well, I think it's terrific.
I think it's terrific.
I think it's terrific.
It's where you put the intonation on terrific.
The intonation is the key to everything with Todd, isn't it? I
mean, it's interesting. I still think it really holds up, and I do think it's a terrific film. And interestingly, although the whole process and development of Barnes Wallace's creation is completely condensed, inevitably, and full of all sorts of things which are true, actually it gets the spirit of it, I think. Yeah. People who were involved and deserve credit aren't credited and aren't involved. But overall, I remembered it being a bit more kind of sort of banging his head against a brick wall of red tape, and actually I think that's not right. And
this is not actually, quite right.
It doesn't really come across that way.
No, because particularly the committee right at the start, there's the awfully fair chairman who says, well, he's got a new idea. You can't expect him to...
Yeah. I'm sure I read somewhere that Barnes said later on that he actually didn't face any bureaucracy at all. They just let him go on with it.
Well, he definitely did face bureaucracy. He faced lots of people who were dead against it, not least Bomber Harris himself, who just thought this was an absolutely bonkers idea.
Which is completely different in the film.
It's completely different in the film. Yeah, but this is my point. I think it gets the spirit of it. Harris is dead against it, but you can't have too many, big chiefs in the Air Ministry or a bomber command kind of pitching in, because it's a film and it just won't work. It's too confusing. It's actually Portal who gives it the green light, very much against Bomber Harris's wishes. And frankly, the reason Harris is against it is because they've just started the all-out strategic air campaign against Germany at the beginning of March, and Lancasters are still incredibly precious, and he just thinks it's going to take up a lot of time, resources, men, money, effort for something which doesn't have a gnat's breath chance of success. And frankly, I'm incredibly sympathetic to that, because when you look at it on paper, it doesn't look like it's going to.
It's a bomb that bounces is totally ridiculous.
It's totally ridiculous.
I mean, and even though, I think what's wonderful about the movie is that they do have the actual footage of the highball testing. Which is the bomb for the Tirpitz. It's the Navy's thing, really. And Jim touched on it there, that Portal gives it approval, but mainly out of inter-service rivalry. He's worried the Navy are gonna triumph with this thing rather than or feel the benefit of this thing rather than the Air Force. But it is amazing that in the film it's the actual footage with the sensor Sharpie on it in every frame.
Like that makes a massive difference.
I'm certain there's a part where it just flickers away and you can see the actual bomb. And I wanted to go through frame by frame, but I didn't have time. So I was like, hang on a minute, there's the actual bomb.
If that's true, they were probably shot for that.
Probably.
Probably.
But no, it's fantastic. It's great, isn't it? And it gets enough over like what you need to know as well. It doesn't hang about. As a child, I always thought that the bit with Wallace testing the bomb took forever because I just wanted to get to the raid. But on a reappraisal, it's only 39 minutes, and it rattles through it at that. But anyway, Matt, maybe talking about some figures there, we should rattle through the cast quickly before we go any further.
In terms of cast, I'm not going to go into everyone because it's a huge cast. You've got veteran, well-known actors, and then you've got newcomers like Patrick McGowan's in there. He's the chap on the door, during the briefing, and he sends the dog away, and there's a repercussion to that. But I'll just go into a couple of the cast, and I've managed to dig up some opinions from some of the principal actors as well, which is nice to give a bit of colour. So Richard Todd, we all know Richard Todd. This is actually his first war movie, I think. From going through his filmography, it looks like this might be his first.
Wow.
Yeah.
In 56, he was in D-Day, 6th of June. 57, Yangtze Incident, which we mentioned. Danger Within in 59. Long, Short and Tall in 61. Longest Day in 1962, where he famously didn't play himself. He played Major Howard. And then Operation Crossbow in 1965. In a 2009 interview, he said he talked a little bit about the work he did to get into the character of Gibson. So he talked to his father, he talked to his widow, his squadron mates, and he described it as a reasonably accurate performance with certain elements of his character perhaps I did suppress, alter a little bit. So it's interesting to get an insight into the effort that he made to get into a character where he didn't have the benefit of Redgrave. He could go and talk to Barnes Wallis.
Yeah.
And famously, just touching on Barnes Wallis and Michael Redgrave, they got on really well, apparently, according to Redgrave's memoir, In Mind's Eye. But Anderson's unpublished memoirs recall that Wallace's reaction to the casting of Redgrave was Barnes took one look at Redgrave and said, "Good God, you have to be joking. You're much too young and much too good looking." Which I'm sure Redgrave felt marvelous about. In Redgrave's memoir, it's very brief. There's literally 3 mentions of Dan Busters in his whole memoir, which I found incredible. And he says, he recalls a conversation with Barnes Wallis, and he says, "I'm not going to mimic you, by the way." And Wallis says, "Of course, no, of course. Your problem is not to imitate the person, but to create him," which Redgrave thought was absolutely fascinating because it kind of highlights Wallace's scientific brain and how he thinks about these things. So he's realized that actors are analyzing characters and putting their own spin onto them, which I thought was fascinating.
That is interesting.
Redgrave, The Lady Vanishes, the Hitchcock movie in 1938, Big Blockade in 1942, Way to the Stars in 45, Captive Heart in 46, about the Czech pilot that's captured. The Quiet American in 1958, The Hill, which we've covered on the show. He was a Telemark, Oh What a Lovely War, and of course Battle of Britain.
Yeah.
In terms of other cast, the cast is huge. And, you run through all the members of the committee, the people at the testing lab, and it's just a very large cast where everyone has very short little scenes. But just to pick out a couple of others, you have Ursula Jeans as Molly Wallace. You've got Patrick Barr as Joseph Mutt Summers, the test pilot. Countless others include Robert Shaw, who gets about 5 seconds of screen time when he takes off his flying cap.
You have to identify him by eyes in this because he's got his breathing apparatus on.
Well, he was still just being a novelist at that stage, wasn't he? Rather than
relatively unknown. Yeah.
Wasn't one of his novels shortlisted for the Booker Prize?
I don't know, actually.
I think it was. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. It was one about set in Africa. He's pretty accomplished, as well as being a.
That's pretty common
as a massive
Anthony Quayle. He was a brilliant writer. George Baker makes a very early appearance, and then I mentioned Patrick McGowan at the beginning of Prisoner Fame, etc. And then just one other I wanted to mention before we move on was Frank Phillips, the BBC announcer, and reads his original 18th May 19 43 BBC broadcast.
No
This
way.
is London
So
at
powerful.
the end there. It's spot on.
Oh,
really
Pitch
is.
perfect.
What do you know?
Yeah, it's
Well,
great.
we should talk about Guy Gibson, because the interesting thing about Richard Todd's performance is, I think, to Barnes Wallace and to Cochrane and to various others, I'm pretty sure that's exactly how Gibson would have appeared. Sort of imperturbable, unflappable, right you are, sir, all that kind of stuff. Charming and polite. But as everyone knows, Gibson was an absolute turmoil at this moment. He was suffering absolutely from combat fatigue.
Yeah.
He was in the throes of a spiral of depression. Was struggling with his nerves. Had a terrible bout of gout, and was absolutely all over the place.
Yeah.
And the difference between how he was openly and what he was internally was absolutely vast. But obviously that's something that is just not explored in the film at all, and that's fine. But it'll be interesting, if Peter Jackson ever does his movie, I suspect there'll be a lot more of that, and I think it'll be more and more interesting for it, because one of the things that makes Gibson's performance in The Downs Raid so interesting and so particularly remarkable is just because he is so completely screwed, and yet he still manages to pull it off, whereas Richard Todd's character is, as portrayed in the film, is much more like kind of Leonard Cheshire, where he's just absolutely kind of rigidly calm.
It clips on through all,
nothing's going to throw him, and the reality was very, very different.
Yeah, it's got a bit more Niven-ish sort of panache type, getting you through the day, where I kind of wanted a little bit more Jack Hawkins in The Cruel Sea, and wanted this sort of real break, but we don't get it. But talking about
you don't get hit. You don't. No. At no point do you know what Gibson is thinking in the film at all. It's just superficial the whole way through. It's kind of he just is as he seems.
It's interesting. I couldn't find out, but it's interesting whether Sheriff was allowed to explore that, or whether he couldn't for the studio, and who meddled with his script, because you see Journey's End, and that's full of broken people. And
Enemy Coast Ahead is pretty, which it's also based on, apart from the Brick Hill book, he's pretty frank in that. For a contemporaneous memoir, because he wrote that straight away, didn't he? And it's pretty much truthful. I mean, he was probably unfit to fly, given the state of his health, and shouldn't have gone.
The MO tells him that, doesn't he? He says the MO tells him he shouldn't be flying.
Makes it all more sort of incredible that they do what they do in these heavy 4-engine bombers. So,
particularly what he did that night, because he's completely controlling the squadron the whole way through on the sort of VHF. There is a absolute control from the commander in a way that would never happen normally in a bombing raid. So it's a completely different way of doing things. He does it absolutely brilliantly. He oversees the destruction of the Myrna Dam, then leads the remainder of the first wave to the Ada Dam, which is in itself no small achievement. Hangs around for them. I mean, it's absolutely astonishing what he does, and the fact that he flies over the Myrna Dam like 6 times or whatever it is.
It's incredible.
In the face of fire is absolutely incredible.
In his shirt
absolutely
sleeves.
Incredible.
Yeah.
In his shirt sleeves. Yeah,
it's incredible. I love it.
I mean, in a way, the thing the film lacks, or is slightly missing, is at the briefing, Gibson says, "Look, we can't afford to mess this up, because we just have to do it again. So you're going to have to get this right this time." And that's the thing in his mind, is if we can actually, please, can we all do a good job?
Yeah.
Because otherwise they'll send us out again next week or something.
Exactly.
And that's the. I mean, obviously that I think. The existence of this film is such a fascinating thing that 13 years, 12 years later, you're making this. It's still all super top secret. Yeah. The bomber offensive. Where does the bomber offensive sit in public imagination anyway? What do they really think about it? And here's a tale of sort of clean cut daring do. As a sort of cultural artifact from 1955, it's such an interesting thing. It's year before Suez, so the shine hasn't gone off everything yet in terms of Britain's military status in the world. It's and you wonder what if you'd made the Dam Busters 2 years later, what that film would have been like. Whether you would have had Gibson unsure of what he's doing and whether you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, imagine it being 10 years later.
Busters marching a minor key.
A minor key, damn.
Someone's probably done it on YouTube.
Yeah,
surely.
have,
there'll be
probably.
some clever person on the internet who's done that. Yeah.
As I say, I think it's this. It is in that golden era. It really is. That special period of British war movies where we're not quite ready to come to terms properly with what's happened. But in our movies, we're going to damn well celebrate it. The closest thing you get to Broken People is the cruel scene in 53. Then the Hill, possibly Sidney Lumet's film with Sean Connery, where you do get people reflecting on their time in the military, reflecting on the things they've done. But I don't think audiences were quite ready for that. I mean, maybe post-Suez, things like that. As Al said, I think maybe they would be.
Well, Al touched on it. I think it's incredible that they made a film about something that was still protected by the Official Secrets Act. You would never get that now.
No.
They would never make it. A studio would go, no, we probably shouldn't do that.
Yeah. But then the Official Secrets Act is super bendy in the years that follow the war, because as we all know, ultra's secret until the 70s. But there are people writing their SOE memoirs in 1947. The rules apply differently and are differently applied. So I mean, it obviously, because Brick Hill has a big hit books with The Great Escape and with his the Bard biography. I know
Reach for the Sky
before off this movie. Yeah, Reach for the Sky. Which so and it is interesting that it, like you say, it's secret, but it's also entirely public. It's very peculiar. And like you say, I mean, would you get a British film about whatever the SAS were doing in Jordan 10 years ago? Because they were definitely there. Let's stop mucking about.
You wouldn't have it. Yeah, it's
no.
Are we not even
It
ready
doesn't
to
seem
make...
there's a massive great secret about upkeep though by 1950s. I mean, first of all, Germans captured an intact one on the raid anyway.
Yeah.
It hasn't been used again. It's not going to be used again. So what's the big secret? I mean, the whole thing's absurd. But
I always think it would be absolutely fascinating to see the uncensored recut into the film.
Yeah,
that would be good. But they don't do it.
Yeah.
In the 2018 re-release, they didn't do it.
One could hope,
Yeah, which makes me think: did they actually draw over the negative, and that's why they can't do it? Who knows? It could have happened in the 50s.
Yeah, probably.
It surprised me.
The Imperial War Museum will have it somewhere. And
they must do.
Yeah. It'll cost you your house to look at it. So,
we know about that. Anyway, maybe we should quickly move on to the Alley Tally, talk about some things we liked, and then get to our favourite scenes, because I'm sure there's plenty.
It's time for Alley Tally on Fighting on Film.
So, chaps, your favourite things from the film, like in terms of kit, equipment, things on show, anything that stood out for you?
Well, the first moment where you hear the Lancasters coming over, where you hear and you hear and see it, and it's real. And I know, it's kind of like it's a familiar wine now, isn't it? It's the real thing's so much better than CGI. And if you want to set someone off, you can set someone off with that as a topic. But it is absolutely true that the first glimpse of them, and then the low flying, the actual presence of the actual Lancasters is completely mind blowing. And I saw one go. I was at my parents' house the other day, and one went over the garden. And we're sat there having a cup of tea, and it's what my family's like. Someone goes, "That's a Merlin."
Expect nothing less, Al. Expect nothing less.
And my dad's too old and lame to sort of run out into the garden like he used to have pointed it. So I sauntered out, and I caught the glimpse of it going away on a clear day, and the colour and the light it looked and sounded as deadly as they do in this film, because that's the other thing is that they're stealth bombers. They're super cutting edge stealth bombers. They are not antique things for wheeling out at coronations. They are absolute, they're the pinnacle of technology at the time. That's what the other thing that's really interesting about the film is it is about a completely cutting edge moment that the technology is as good as it got at the time. And they're not talking about the oboe in the planes that they did use to pop up and check the positions and stuff, but it's the Lancs. I mean, and obviously there's mosquitoes in this, which is sexy too, but it's the Lancs for me.
100%. I mean, yeah, and you're right about the sound. I mean, that the whole raid for me is a masterclass in sound design. It's all non-diegetic sound. There's no soundtrack, anything. The only time you really hear the Dam Busters march is at the start, and you have a small reprieve before they go on the raid, and you have it once they've done the raid. But that whole sequence is literally Merlin engines, flak, and radio chatter, and it's all you need. And the soundscape is beautiful. It's probably one of the greatest soundscapes in British cinema to date, in my opinion. But I do have to quickly mention my wife has an Ali Tally pick this week. She's our executive producer, so she can have it one as always. She said that Mrs Wallace's chandeliers are some of the best chandeliers she's ever seen in film. So I just had to quickly mention that. I loved it.
Well,
it was great. Yeah, she always has a different view to the movies than me. She said, "Oh, they're nice. I wonder what colour they were." And I was like, we were just musing on that for about 20 minutes. But as I say, like the raid for me, it's the back projection of the guys in the cockpit. It still holds up fantastically. You know, the cutting out that they've done is top notch. It's not like a cheap B movie, quick edit, quick cut job. It's really thoughtful. They don't use too much of it. The tracer still holds up, and it's one of the movies where I really worried when the 2018 Blu-ray remaster came out. I really worried they were going to mess with it and alter it and change it, but they really didn't. It just makes it pops so much more. And crisp, the and even like the miniatures of the dam and the blowing up the dams and things like that, fantastic. And I've got to mention quickly that I don't know what people think about the explosions, because people say they look a bit rubbish, but I've thought about it lately, and they superimpose water on the explosion. And when I was a kid, I was like, "Well, that's weird. Explosions don't look like that." But I think it's a theatrical choice, a design choice, where you're showing the power of the water that you're going to unleash. I don't know if anyone's ever thought about that, but that's just sprung to my mind lately. But no, as I say,
think it looks pretty good, to be honest.
It does.
I mean, the thing I love about it so much is seeing all the real things. You know, for whether it be the Lancasters, but also the testing labs, the water labs at in Twickenham, and you know, the places that are real, and the fact that it's Scampton, you know, it's all filmed at Scampton, and it's only kind of 10 years after the end of the war, so there's a kind of sort of verisimilitude, is that the right word? To the whole thing, which I think is just fantastic. It's fascinating as a piece of history, as well as the knowledge that, you know, as a large part of it, they're getting it absolutely spot on because it's filmed in the right places.
I'd agree with that completely.
It's all the better for it.
You know, and that's why, you know, and that's why it's such a tragedy what's happening to Scampton.
Well, and in a way,
True.
I mean, Todd offers that verisimilitude, doesn't he? I mean, he's not 24. It's obvious in the film that he's not, that he's too old.
No.
But he's at least experienced leadership in combat. So, you know, if the buildings are 10 years too old, then I'm all right with the actors being 10 years too old, because they've experienced, they're of the same.
Yeah, that's the point.
That time adjacent to the events. It'll do. In fact, it'll more than do. It's why the film works so well, I feel. And Todd is, you know, he was a captain in Seven Para, wasn't he? He's bringing his experience of leading men in tough spots with him. And
in that 2009 interview, he actually talks about that, and he talks about what having a cast, which the majority of which was serving personnel during the war and after, what that brings to the film. And we've talked about this on the show before. That generation of actors gave a weight. They knew what the bearing of an officer, of an NCO, of you know, a ranker should be. They brought that out. And as for Scampton, in that interview, he says it was intact as it had been during the raid. The grave of the dog, whose name should be left unmentioned, quote from Todd, is still there. And he talks about, you know, the weight that added to making the film. And he felt that personally, which I thought was really interesting.
That is really good. That
100%.
I mean, if there is this remake, which is sort of one of the elephants in the room with the Dam Busters, really now, you don't because Peter Jackson's use of CGI. I'm going to stick my neck out here. In King Kong, that dated pretty quickly, and you wouldn't watch that now and go, it's like the dinosaurs are really there. You'd think it's like watching a video game, like
animation. Yeah,
it's 2005 animation. And obviously the advantage this film has is that those Lancasters are really there and they're real and they're in the places they would have been in. So how actually you would, if you were remaking, how you'd recapture that feeling, because it's the feeling in the film of the planes being real that makes the film.
But he's built models.
Yeah,
some pretty big ones. Yeah, he's built some scale ones, and also some smaller ones. So I think that's the plan. Is CGI? Yes, but
probably be a mix.
Yeah,
I suppose Masters of the Air will be Masters of the Air will be the thing that throws the gauntlet down on this on any aviation project.
I think it will.
Yeah.
Any studio that's going to back that is going to literally be like, how's Master of the Air done?
They'll be looking at it closely.
Enough scope. Yeah, because the crew they got, Stephen Fry was going to write the script, I think, at one point. I don't know if he's still attached.
No, Stephen Fry has written the script.
Oh, he's written it. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, it's got enough people behind it. We'll wait and see.
Well, you were consulting on it, weren't you, Jim?
Yeah, I'm the historical consultant on it, and they've bought the rights to my book and everything. So,
I'd heard that. I didn't know if it was true.
Live in hope. Live in hope.
Oh yeah, of course.
We all do.
I think we all do. I mean, any big budget war film's good for the genre and British film anyway. So maybe we should
before we move on, Rob. I think I just want to jump off on something Al said there that CGI dates it, and I think it's super interesting that they made in the 50s, when they made this film, they made the conscious choice to make it in black and white. That was the choice. They decided to do that. That was the artistic choice. And that's probably lent to its, timelessness.
Yeah.
Because black and white has that quality to it that
I think
that does lead to timelessness.
Also,
it also feeds into that feeling that the Second World War is black and white.
Yeah.
Good guys and bad guys. You can paint emotional colours sort of more straightforwardly, perhaps in black and white than you can in color. And I think, obviously, I mean, maybe it's because they're trying to work around the existing footage or something. We're shown enough times in the film that they're watching that on film that you could find a way around it. He doesn't have to go to a culver. He can watch the film. But I mean, maybe that's the thing that drove that decision. But you're right, it makes it appear timeless because after all the real footage you've ever seen is in black and white, so it sits in that context.
Very true. And it holds up to restoration a lot better, and I think personally film stock of that era gives it such more depth to a movie anyway. But it really does, and it's when you think of British war movies, you think of black and white, I think, anyway. So, favourite scenes, chaps, and there'll be a lot, but I'll kick off. And for me, it's a film about letters. The script is about letters. So, one of my favourite scenes is the farmer writing his letter to the RAF to complain about the Lancasters going over, and he says, "Every time one of these Lancasters fly over, my chickens lay premature eggs," and it makes me chuckle every time because I'm
the war effort.
Yeah, exactly. Doesn't care about anything else other than his farming. But it's great because then it shows he's trying to do his bit for the country by farming and helping with produce and things like that. It's a lot of it enriches the film for me. But I love that it's the angry old farmer just supping his bitter, writing a bitter letter to the RAF. It's funny.
With his funny old accent.
Yeah, it is a bit dodgy, isn't it? Yeah. And then you have obviously Guy's last line to Wallace. So he says, "You've heard a worse night than any of us. Why don't you find the doctor and ask for one of his sleeping pills?" And Wallace is drying his eyes and he says, "Aren't you going to turn in, Gibby?" Todd gives probably one of the greatest deliveries of his entire career. "No, I have to write some letters first." And he walks off to his office. And it's quite possibly one of the greatest pieces of scripting and direction and delivery in British cinema for me. Because it's just so stoic. It's perfectly written. I think it's the thing I said about this at the start. If R.C. Sheriff doesn't write this, it's a completely different movie. It has a completely different feel. There's just something about having mainly theatre and playwright doing this over a screen director or like an American scriptwriter at that time. It's just something about everything coming together in that last moment. And you don't forget the men that have just been lost. They have a mention that they are remembered. They're not just written out and forgotten like a lot of war movies do. It's on par with those emotional hits of The Cruel Sea. I always mention it, but it is on par with that. And it's just, what a way to end a movie. It makes you think, it makes you remember. Does all it needs to do.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yes, and it because it's a great, like you said, it's a great coup de théâtre, isn't it? Because you could watch this purely as an adventure film if you wanted. An exciting adventure film, and it's almost as if the whole film has been written for that line.
Yeah,
in a way that Sheriff wrote the whole film backwards.
Definitely could.
You know, the all right, I'll pull the rug from under you now. You know, that was tremendous fun, but because also when Hopgood goes down, when at the Mona Dam, Gibson is sort of like, has a look on his face, oh bugger, but that's about it. And that's how the losses are sort of treated, with kind of eye roll or exasperation at most. There's no one going, oh, there's no emoting of any kind in those sequences, and that's really interesting. You like you said, Jim, if you made this film 10 years later, would there be someone going, war is hell in the bowels of the Lancaster?
Of course it would be. Yeah,
possibly. 1970s film. Definitely one of the crew will be going, why are we doing this?
People be
why will this war never end?
Yeah,
and
just think of all the people we've killed.
Yeah, curse you, exactly. Harris, you blagger.
Exactly right. But the the 90s Steven Spielberg version, there'd be a slowly fluttering flag and a bugle sounding at some point.
Yeah, there would be.
Yeah,
sort of, after Aaron Copland.
But it is that moment at the. You're absolutely right. It's a perfectly written line, perfectly directed, perfectly delivered, and lands the film or hits the target as sure as the upkeeps do. It's as if they're skipping along the water for the duration of the film. And sorry, that analogy has run wildly out of control.
No, it works. It 100% works.
Well, I've got to say, it's the Murder Dam scene for me. Just that whole sequence is just
the entire raid.
Sensational. From the cockpit to the looking across the lake to the eruption. The whole of that scene is just totally brilliant. It really is. It's still very, very exciting, even though it's in black and white, even though it's kind of creaking a bit, but it's still really, I think that's absolutely tops.
Yeah. It is. Yeah, it holds up fantastically well. Matt, what's any favourite scenes from you?
Oh yeah, I've got a few. We forgot to mention it in the alley, Sally, but there is that. I was told it was a Canberra, but apparently, Rob, it's because
Varsity.
Varsity in the far background on
Jury's out. What it is? Yeah, one of our followers on Twitter told us that when they're preparing for the raid, and they're just about to get in their vans and go over to the Lancasters. Yeah. I think it's one of the aircraft they used to film, and it's parked up like right in the back shot, and it's blinking. You'll miss its stuff, but it's definitely
noticeably silver-skinned 50s jet powered. That's that sort of. Yeah.
But there's some Lincolns in the background as well, aren't there? That they used Lincolns on the airstrip to sort of fill in for Lancasters. I know that much, but I hadn't noticed that. I hadn't seen that.
It might be one of those. To be fair, I can't remember exactly what it is. I have to watch it again.
No, it's definitely smaller than a Lincoln.
I know, right?
But yeah, that's one of my favorite scenes because I love the way that the preamble to the raid, it builds that tension. You've got all the guys going to breakfast. You have that little joke with the pay clerk tries to get bacon and egg. Are you flying tonight? Saying like, no, that I pay you every Thursday, or whatever the line is. And that's such a small inclusion, just to throw a little bit of humor into this extremely tense build up, because you've got Redgrave's Wallace being so tense, and you see the tension on all the crew's faces. The shaving, he's decided to put a shirt on, clean shirt. The way they pan across the bedrooms and the way that is mirrored at the end, where they have that brilliant sequence of the silent price of the raid sequence, where they show the empty quarters. They pan over the chap's travel clock and his, the shaving foam and that, and it's very powerful, and it's a technique used before. It's used in This Is the Glory at the end, where they pan across the Nissen hut, with the empty beds, and countless other films. But it's very, very powerful, and the fact that there's no score, they could have put Dan Buster's March over that, and that would have been acceptable. But it's silence, and I think that adds a lot of weight to it, and I really do enjoy that. And James mentioned earlier the scenes at Teddington where they're bouncing the snooker ball, I think it is. It looks like it anyway. Down that tank, and that's just such a beautiful shot. Down the full length of that tank. The framing of that in terms of cinematography is gorgeous. I really love that.
It's brilliant.
They're my favourites.
It is. It's the cinematography is top notch. Even I love the shot of when he's sitting with the committee and it goes up the table. It's a fantastic dolly shot. Really, really gets the weight of what Wallace is trying to put over to these people and the amount of people he has to talk to. I really enjoy that scene. So maybe we should mosey into final thoughts like we do. And I'll kick off again quickly. So for me, it's a film of like almost 3 movies. You've got a biopic of Wallace and Gibson in a sense. You've got very, very good action sequence that could be pulled out of like Appointment in London. It does that great thing that these movies of that time do. They don't waste their money on like a mid-sequence like action battle or something. They save their best bit for the second half, and they make you wait for it, and it's really worth it. And it's a rewarding film to watch because it sets you up perfectly. It's a real good ramp up, and it knows what it's doing. It's a testament to that golden era of British war movies. It's up there with The Cruel Sea. It's got to be in your top 5, top 10. I know on the TikTok I say it's one of the war movies to watch before you die. It's timeless, and it's just a film about drive and determination at its core for me. And it's just a fantastic movie. I don't know how you could hate it. I don't know how you could dislike it.
Yeah.
It has a special place in Zeitgeist, for sure.
You touched on it at the start. There would be no Star Wars. There wouldn't be no wankers calling themselves Jedi on census forms if it wasn't for the Dam Busters. It wasn't for this
come
film.
After me, Al. I could put what I like on those forms.
But you know what I mean? It's that and the one thing Gibson doesn't use is the Force. He does it himself.
Yeah,
they do it themselves. They don't rely on some ghostly hand to guide them into the impossible, shot. I agree with you. I don't know how you couldn't like it. I don't know how you couldn't find it gripping. And the modern version would probably start. I don't know. You'd see them in action. You'd see them doing something. You'd see some planes. It wouldn't start with Barnes Wallace in his garden with his children. And I think that it's quite interesting to see a British war movie with the sort of representation of civilian life as much as anything else. The bombers going overhead, the bomber stream going overhead, and they're not in any danger as such, but they're aware of what's going on and the sacrifice and the commitment. I think, and it's sheriff really. It's all these deft touches, as well as it's some proper funny moments too. Would you say you need a Wellington bomber? You say you need a Wellington bomber for test drops? What possible argument could I push for? Hey, told him I designed it. Do you think that might help?
Great line.
Which is almost camp, that moment. It's a moment that borders on camp. But without this film, there's a whole on set, a whole next generation. Star Wars is only 20 years later, actually, if you think about it. There's a whole other generation of movies that wouldn't happen. Luke Skywalker is nothing without Guy Gibson. Doesn't exist. Han Solo is nothing without Dingy Young or whatever.
True.
Dingy. The other thing about it, it's not dingy, it's dingy.
Dingy. Yeah. My mum and dad were arguing about that when we watched it together. It's amazing. Now James Holland and Al Murray doing the exact same. Fantastic.
It's obviously it's a piece of history, and it is absolutely rooted in the time in which it's filmed. and there's lots of nods to it, which absolutely mark it, and that not least its black and whiteness and the kind of sort of dodgy special effects and all the rest of it compared to what we've got now, and yet it's also completely timeless.
Yeah,
and it does completely hold up. And I think one of the things that's really struck me about revisiting it is it's nothing like as triumphalist as I kind of thought it was.
No,
in my memory,
yeah.
It's actually much more wistful. Particularly that ending, and I totally agree with you that the ending is absolutely superb. It's a really good bit. The kind of sort of singing, sort of walking off down the road in Scampton. It's a superb film. It really is. It really does hold up. And it's also a lesson in how to construct a story. As you're pointing out, Al. A modern day version would have much more action right from the word go, be much more wham bam, and there is this sort of impatience, isn't there?
Yeah.
I always prefer TV programs today and films today, which are a bit more languid, which are a bit more kind of ponder, just sort of let them breathe a little bit and develop the character and develop your setting and your ambience and what you're trying to do.
But that's a question of confidence, isn't it? That's
rather than just sort of wham bam every 2 seconds,
where
you come out of a headache.
That's a question of creative confidence. I mean, I don't know if you're fans of Better Call Saul, but the fact that they'll have an episode where a man takes a car apart and then puts it back together, shot on time lapse, and that scene lasts, I don't know, 10 minutes. And they want you to see what he's like, and they want you. They have the confidence that you're interested in, the confidence you've the patience, and the ability to wait for the payoff. And after all, the raid is about the payoff. So if you interfere with that in the pacing of the film, you undermine how incredible it is. If you did have Gibson sort of doing some daring thing, and you can feel it, can't you? You can feel
they could have showed his last sortie, couldn't they? If they wanted to include a bit of action.
No, I think they would.
Terrific.
It's
a great film.
No,
really
it is.
Good film.
And I think it's as well, talking about a remake, if they did it, it's a different era of cinema as well. People don't hold movies like they used to. You've got a completely different younger audience and how they consume cinema. I'm not sure it would work, but I think if done right, it might. But then, who knows? It's one of those things. It's
the younger audience would be saying, "Why have they ripped off Star Wars?"
True, they might.
A modern audience would be going, "This is shameless. This is outrageous." And and where's the Force? In all this.
Yeah, you can have R2D2 operating a rear turret. That'd be quite fun to see.
Well, R2D2 is sort of like H2S. He's a dome that sticks out the top. Rather than out the bottom.
It's
probably what he's
He's a Dostal turret.
Yeah.
I think touching on what it is culturally for British audiences, I think we have to go back to when the film came out. So it was the most successful film at the British box office that year. Not only that, the score was a top 20 single.
Really?
Wow, I didn't know that.
So how often does that happen?
No,
so
really.
There is a palpable basis to this cultural zeitgeist within the British psyche that this film has. It's in there's beer adverts where they bounce a keg.
The Carling one.
Yeah, the Carling one. It's very much within the memory of the war, and I find all that extremely fascinating. But we've talked about that already, so I won't go further. But I will note that the first Todd maneuver, hands on hips, occurs at 38 minutes 32 seconds.
Fab.
I was like to time it. And the only other thing I really want to mention is the amount of laws that Barnes Wallis breaks in that first opening sequence. So not only does he break the blackout, he leaves the porch door open for the Germans that are flying over, and he then divulges the entire plan to the local GP. Which I
we were talking about this to me last night.
He's very, very leaky, isn't he? He's extremely leaky.
They have these dams in Rubber Valley, and they make a fabulous target. And then he shows him a diagram of how the bomb would work, and they have these torpedo nets, and we can't drop a torpedo. And he's like, "Oh, okay." Well, I hope that GP doesn't talk to anyone. Loose lips, blow
do take it steady. Do take it steady, Barnes.
Yeah.
Don't
suffer both ends.
don't suffer from nervous exhaustion.
Yes,
Just
please.
don't.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's the
Yes,
fair
I'll
point,
give
which
that
I
some
hadn't really
thought.
considered. But yeah, you're spot on.
Yeah.
It works perfectly as a theatrical device and narrative and introducing the concept and everything. I think it works perfectly fine. But it did make me laugh.
It's good.
But when you combine the cinematography, that score, the performances, it makes it an all-time classic. And I think it's in most people's. Whenever you read those top 10 war movies, it's always in the top 10 somewhere, isn't it?
It's always there. I'm writing a top 5 war movie article at the moment. I'm trying my best not to include it, but I just can't. It's like I'm just like, I got to get an RAF film in there. It's got to have to be like the Dam Busters. So, I mean, chaps, it's been fantastic talking with you. If you're not a fan of the We Have Ways podcast, if you listen to the show, I don't know why you wouldn't be, but please go and listen to it. It's fabulous. Do go and read James's book about Operation Chastise, because if someone's going to buy the rights to it to make a film, it's probably more than worth your time to read. So thanks for joining us, chaps, as always.
Yes, been marvellous. Thank you.
Thank you very
An
much.
absolute pleasure. Goner. It's
Goner,
sir.
Yes.
Goner.
Amazing. Don't forget to visit our website, fightingonfilm.com, where you can find the complete back catalogue of the show. Leave us a review on whatever you're listening on, and we'll catch you next week, guys. Thanks for listening.
Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.
Cheers, everyone.